I've got a story for you tonight so hard-edged and hopeful it burns going down. Out where the prairie meets the unforgiving sky, in a land that chews up dreams and spits out bones, two strangers, one carrying 4 small lives, the other carrying nothing but ghosts, were thrown together by a storm mean enough to kill. It kicked off with the softest sound imaginable, a baby's faint whimper in the dark, yet loud enough to wake something long buried in a man who'd sworn off feeling anything at all. Before we chase this trail any further, drop a like if you're already invested, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Texas? Montana? Somewhere across the ocean? The wind kept howling long after the snow quit, scraping low across the frozen ground like a dull blade on rawhide. White veils tore off the ridges and drifted ghost-like over the empty prairie, weaving between the skeletal cottonwoods as if searching for forgotten graves. Sophronia Quill stood knee-deep in the drift, skirts frozen stiff, little Phineas a heavy, limp weight strapped tight against her chest. The other 3, Judson, Zerelda, and Elwood, pressed close behind her, faces raw and wind-burned, eyes wide and rimmed red. Their breaths came in quick, shallow puffs, like trapped sparrows fluttering inside a tin can. The wagon had given up just past midday. One wheel snapped clean through the hub, split by the cold, as if the wood itself had lost the will to hold. The mule, Jericho, had wandered off soon after, dragging broken traces behind him like chains on a restless spirit. Sophronia hadn't shed a tear. There simply wasn't time. The land lay flat and featureless in every direction. No landmark pines, no distant ridge to aim for. Only the wind keening through the hollows. Whatever trail there once was had long since vanished under white. Hours blurred together. She only knew her legs throbbed, and one foot had gone numb as stone. Phineas stirred feebly in the sling. Judson, the middle boy, let out a small, broken whimper. She didn't hush him. There was no comfort left to give. She carried no map, no name for this God-forsaken stretch of nowhere. Only a letter folded twice in her coat pocket, ink blurred from the heat of her palm. The man who'd signed it, Body Rourke, had promised land out west. Whether he'd meant it or just spoken the kind of sweet words men toss out in hard seasons, she no longer cared to guess. A dark shape flickered far off, low and still. Her pulse lurched, then steadied. Not a cabin. Not rescue. Just a stump, a boulder, or the cruel mirage of hope that always left you colder when it faded. She turned away. Judson's knees buckled first. He dropped with a soft thud, swallowed by the snow. She spun back. He tried to stand, but his arms and legs moved like they belonged to someone else. Her hands stung as she hauled him up, wedged him under one arm, and kept pushing on. Another mile, another 50 yards. She couldn't tell anymore. The sun had drowned behind a wall of iron-gray cloud. No fire tonight, no shelter. Then, just beyond the next low rise, something upright. A leaning fence post, weathered and crooked. Another beside it. And farther on, a low, hunched shape half buried in white. A barn or shed sagging toward the earth like it had tried to sink and failed. She moved toward it without expecting anything. Pure momentum now, the stubborn march that outlasts every other kind of strength. Closer, the outline sharpened. A small barn, one corner caved in, door hanging ajar as though 100 blizzards had tried to slam it shut and given up. She pressed Phineas tighter to her heart and herded the others through the gap. The air inside still carried the faint musk of old manure and sun-dried hay. She sank to her knees. Not warm, but the wind couldn't reach them here. A sharp cough, human, close, cut through the quiet. She looked up, A man stood in the half-shadows, lit only by the dying daylight. Heavy wool coat darkened by years and hard use, hat tugged low. His eyes narrowed. Not cruel, just wary. One hand gripped a rifle, barrel down but ready. They stared at each other across the dim space. Ice-crusted Sophronia's lashes. The children stayed behind her skirts. Phineas let out a faint, animal whimper. She couldn't speak. Words had frozen somewhere deep. The man didn't budge. His gaze slid from her face to the huddled kids, then back. The rifle dipped a fraction. "I ain't got much," he said, voice low and deliberate like he measured every word. "But y'all best step all the way in for full dark catches you." Sophronia gave no answer. Her legs simply gave out as she crossed the threshold. The sudden stillness, the mere absence of that biting wind, brought hot tears she hadn't known were waiting. The man leaned the rifle against a post and knelt beside her. He spread an old saddle blanket over the hay, eased the children down. His hands were rough, cracked from work, but sure and gentle. He said nothing more for a long stretch, moving through the barn with the calm certainty of a man who'd made peace with being alone. No livestock remained, only a barn cat, Nimbus, perched on a rafter, blinking slow amber eyes in the gloom. Straw bales leaned in one corner. A rusted pot-belly stove crouched against the far wall, its crooked pipe punching through the roof, where missing shingles let thin daylight bleed in. The man walked to the stove, swung the door open, and pulled a handful of kindling from a sack. Sophronia watched him, still crouched low, Phineas cradled against her. He scraped a lucifer along his boot sole, struck flame. The kindling caught with a hiss and snap, throwing frail heat that reminded every aching bone exactly how close they'd come to freezing. The children edged nearer, hesitant at first, as though afraid the warmth might vanish if they trusted it too soon. He let them come closer without a word. Sophronia eased little Phineas out of the sling and cradled his face in her palm. His tiny eyelids flickered, just a whisper of movement. Still drawing breath, a long, ragged exhale escaped her. She hadn't known she was holding it. Thaddeus noticed. "You folks come off the trail?" His voice scraped low, rough as gravel under boot. She gave a single nod. "Where you bound for?" She paused. The letter tucked in her coat pocket weighed like lead now. The name scrawled there might as well have been etched on a headstone. "West," she said at last. "Past Marrow Creek." He dipped his chin slow, thoughtful. "Ain't a whole lot out that way except wind and hard lessons." Her words cracked on the next breath. He said he had land. They all say that. A heavy quiet dropped between them, sharp-edged and thick enough to cut. She pulled the blanket snug around the children and chafed Judson's small hands between hers, trying to coax warmth back into the blue-tinged fingers. Her own knuckles burned, swollen raw and crimson. The fire in the stove murmured low. Thaddeus reached into a worn canvas sack in the corner, came back with a tin of beans and a strip of jerked beef. He didn't shove them at her. Instead, he set them close to the heat, then stepped back, giving her room to decide. She pried the tin open with careful fingers, portioning the beans first to the children. They ate slow, lips trembling. Not from the cold anymore, but from the battle to keep tears locked behind their teeth. She never asked his name. He never gave it. But when Zerelda fumbled a bean and lunged for it, nearly toppling toward the glowing stove, he moved quick, caught her small frame, steadied her with one broad hand at her back, gentle as if she were made of spun glass. "You got names for 'em?" he asked, voice softer now. She nodded. "Judson, Zerelda, Elwood, and the baby's Phineas. You riding alone?" She met his eyes, hers hollowed out by too many miles. Since Kansas. That said it all. He didn't pry further, just held her gaze a long beat, something flickering deep behind those steady eyes, like an old door creaking open in a house nobody had entered for years. You can stay the night, he said. Come first light. We'll see where the trail leads you next. He turned, shook out an old horse blanket, spread it near the stove, then settled with his back to the wall, rifle balanced across one knee. She watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way he kept his stare fixed somewhere past her, but still caught every creak and sigh in the barn. The fire dwindled to embers. Outside, the wind clawed at the boards, but inside it was endurable. The children had drifted off, limbs tangled in a heap, their breathing soft and even, dreams she couldn't follow. She sat beside them, knees drawn up, studying Thaddeus in the dying glow. He wasn't a young man anymore. Deep lines carved his face like wind-scoured rock. Coat patched at the elbows, boots split and worn. Yet he sat watchful, deliberate, like someone who'd once believed in the world and paid dearly for the mistake. Beyond the slanted roof, the cold held the night in iron silence. But in that half-ruined barn, something had quietly changed. She didn't know what dawn would bring. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she believed she might still be breathing when it came. By morning, the wind had finally quit its howling. All that remained was a vast, white hush pressing against the barn walls, whether warning or mercy, she couldn't say. Pale sunlight slipped through roof cracks, striping the straw in thin gold bars. Phineas woke first, tiny fists stretching toward the light like he was reaching for something promised. Then the others stirred. Groggy, stiff-jointed but alive, warmed through enough to have made it. Thaddeus was already moving, rolling hay bales to shore up the caved-in corner. He worked like a man who hadn't closed his eyes all night, though his face betrayed nothing. She watched him a moment before pushing to her feet, every joint protesting. Her back ached deep from yesterday's load and every load before it. I can help, she said. He glanced across, then nodded once. Got a back like mine? Best keep it working or it'll stiffen up solid. She didn't ask whether the words carried kindness or just plain truth. She fell in beside him, lifting what her arms could manage. Her hands felt thick and awkward. Fresh cracks opened with every lift, but the sting was welcome. It meant she was still in her own skin. When the barn door groaned wide, sunlight poured in fierce and bright. She blinked hard. The world outside looked scrubbed clean, untouched. Snow blanketed every post and cattail like a burial cloth. No footprints, no trail. Thaddeus gazed out across it all and spat once into the drift. Ain't going nowhere today, he said. She didn't argue. Couldn't. The mere thought of dragging the children back into that endless white churned her stomach. Inside, he tipped water from a battered kettle into a small tin pot and set it by the fire. She caught herself waiting, for a word, a look, anything, but he stayed quiet. At last she asked, You live here by yourself? A slow nod. Had a brother. He was gone. Had a wife once. She rode out one day and never looked back. Sophronia didn't push for details. No need. The barn itself told the story. The long silences. The way Thaddeus never let his eyes linger on the fire too long, the careful distance he kept from everything warm. It all spoke plain enough. She gave her name then, almost without thinking. It had been ages since anyone said it back to her like it mattered. Sophronia, she told him. He paused mid-motion, then dipped his chin once. Thaddeus! Phineas fussed again in her arms. She rocked him slow and steady. Thaddeus reached into a nearby crate, pulled out a clean rag scrap, and passed it over without a word. The small gesture caught her off guard. He hadn't pried about the letter, hadn't asked a thing about the man waiting out west. She was thankful for the quiet respect of it. By noon, the young ones started coming back to life a little. Zerelda discovered a scrap of twine and turned it into a cat's cradle game, fingers flying. Elwood sat mesmerized by Nimbus perched high on the rafter, tail flicking slow like he was sharing secrets with the boy. Sophronia felt a real smile tug at her lips, the first in what felt like forever. She tried to hide it, but Thaddeus caught the shift. "Folks waiting back east?" he asked, eyes on the stove, not on her. "No." The quiet settled again, but it had changed, not crushing anymore. Just there, alive between them, tentative and breathing. She caught herself watching him more. The deliberate way he moved, how he tilted his head to the wind like it was whispering things only he could understand. He wasn't harsh, wasn't shut tight, not really. Just weathered deep, like parched ground after a long, dry spell. Still solid underneath, but split open in places. Later, while the children napped in a heap under the blankets, she slipped outside bundled in Thaddeus's old coat. The air bit sharp, but the sun carried a strange, calm light. Hills rolled away in every direction, blanketed white, sky and earth melting together in one soft, endless hush. He stepped up behind her, quiet, slow enough not to startle. Arms folded, he squinted out at the same view. "Storms like that'll break most folks," he said low, "but sometimes they leave behind something tougher." She stayed silent. Her fingers, knotted tight in the coat sleeve, eased just a fraction closer to him. Neither spoke again. The days after settled into a rhythm, not soft, but steady as a heartbeat. Thaddeus showed her the old hand pump. The handle fought back, but gave water if you coaxed it right. He taught Judson how to stack firewood neat and true, got Zerelda giggling with a length of string and a whittled twig horse, let Elwood perch beside him while he carved, never saying much, just letting the boy soak it in with wide eyes. Sophronia mended what she could. Blankets, torn clothes, her own cracked boots. Sometimes she hummed under her breath, low and wandering, while Phineas slept warm against her shoulder. Her hands stayed chapped raw, her back throbbed constant, but the plain work anchored her somehow, gave her solid ground underfoot again. Nights turned colder once more. The children curled tight together, breath fogging the dark in little clouds. Thaddeus kept to the far wall, never closer, but he was always up before dawn, fire crackling steady by the time the first gray light showed. She wondered sometimes if the man slept at all. One evening, fresh snow drifting down in silent feathers, he pulled an old leather-bound book from a shelf she hadn't noticed. Corners frayed to threads, spine cracked. He set it by the fire, opened it across his knees, thumb resting light inside the cover. Sophronia watched from the other side of the room. "You read?" he asked, voice quiet as the falling flakes. She nodded. "My mother taught me, before the world turned too noisy." He lifted his gaze at that. Something in her tone must have struck deep. "Used to read to my brother," he said, "back when we figured books could sort out the mess of things." He slid the volume across to her. Pages dusty, binding split, mostly psalms, bits of old verse, a passage or two from Homer. She traced the words with her fingertips like they might break. "Pick one," he said. She did. In the hush of snow against the roof, she read aloud. Her voice started rough, scraped raw, but it steadied, smoothed out warm like leather worked soft by hands. The children drifted off to the sound. Thaddeus sat motionless, eyes locked on the flames. Later, when the others slept deep, he spoke again. "That fella out west," he said. "You still reckon he's waiting?" She shook her head, slow. "No." He nodded like he'd known it already. "I didn't come for him," she said. "Not truly. I came because staying wasn't an option anymore." He met her eyes, steady, unflinching. "Then it's a damn good thing you kept walking." She closed the book, passed it back. "I almost didn't." His fingers brushed hers as he took it. For a heartbeat, neither drew away. Just skin against skin, a fleeting touch. But it carried more weight than any vow ever spoken. The next dawn broke clear, and a jackrabbit hopped bold near the fence line. Thaddeus raised his rifle, squeezed once, clean through the neck, and carried the limp body inside without comment. Sophronia skinned and gutted it under his quiet watch, then set the pieces to simmer slow over the glowing coals. The aroma rose thick and savory, wrapping the barn in a warmth she hadn't tasted since before the hard years stole everything gentle. Home. That's what it smelled like. After they'd eaten, Thaddeus pulled a stone jug from a shadowed nook and poured her a tin cup of mulled cider, steam curling off the surface. She took a sip. The heat bloomed sharp on her tongue. A surprised laugh escaped her. "You ain't like most men," she said. He lifted one brow. "That so? How you figure?" "You hold back. You listen close. You give folks room to pick their own path." He let the silence stretch before answering. "Lost too damn much to go pushing anything on anybody. These days I just hang on to whatever decides to stay." The wind rose again that night, rattling the boards like impatient fingers. But inside the barn, the walls held firm. She curled up beside the children, the fire's last glow warming her back. Before sleep claimed her, she glanced across the dim space at Thaddeus. He sat in his usual spot. Boots stretched out, eyes on the darkness beyond the door. This time, though, he looked straight back. A week slipped by, maybe longer. Mornings the sky softened from iron gray to thin blue. Snow pulled away from the fence posts in slow retreat, like it finally understood its season was done. Water dripped steady from the eaves. The cold lingered sharp at first light, but it no longer carried death in its teeth. Just the ache of old habit. Sophronia started waking before the kids, pulled by the sounds of Thaddeus moving outside. He fed the few scrappy chickens, checked traps along the creek, mended wind-torn fences with hands already chapped raw. She began stepping out to join him, shrugging into his spare coat without a word asked. He never turned her away. Just passed her the hammer or the wire when she needed it, offered a low word of advice when her grip slipped. Talk came easier now, but never spilled over. Thaddeus wasn't one for empty chatter. He shared in fragments. His brother Zephyr drowned in the spring flood 3 years gone. The woman, Artemisia Landry, though he never said her full name, lit out with a traveling salesman, claiming she couldn't live on silence and open sky alone. He told it flat, like he'd long accepted folks don't stick. Sophronia gave pieces back. Reuben walked out in their first hard year. Not dead, just gone by choice. The farm sold off for debts. Neighbors turned their backs once there was no man to front the place. 4 kids, empty pockets, and a trail west built more on desperate hope than solid ground. Thaddeus listened without pity, just real attention. The kind that made her feel visible again, not as another mouth to feed, but as a woman who'd clawed through hell and kept standing. One evening, while Elwood and Zerelda built a little stone fort on the floor, and Judson helped Thaddeus grease a seized hinge, Sophronia sat by the stove with Phineas dozing against her chest. She watched the flames dance behind the grate, and felt the old burdens shift, lighten just enough to breathe around, She hadn't meant to stay this long, hadn't mapped anything beyond surviving that first blizzard, but now the thought of packing up, stepping back into the wide unknown, it tugged hard the other way, deep in her ribs. She caught Thaddeus watching her from where he crouched beside Judson. His face stayed blank as ever, but his eyes held a question he hadn't voiced. She looked away before she had to answer. Come morning, she found him cinching the saddle on Jericho. The mule had drifted home 2 days earlier, gaunt but breathing. Thaddeus tied a small bundle behind the cantle, then turned to see her framed in the doorway. You ridin' out? He nodded. Town's a full day. Need salt, flour, couple other things. She didn't ask what else. He met her eyes steady. You'll be fine here. She nodded. We'll keep the fire alive. He lingered a beat, shifting weight like words were stuck somewhere stubborn. If you change your mind about pushin' on, there's land here needs work. She stared. Phineas stirred in her arms. I figured my choices ran out a long time ago. His voice came low, sure. They didn't. Then he swung up, nudged Jericho forward. Hooves crunched snow as the gate swung wide, then shut behind him. She stood watching long after horse and rider vanished over the rise. Her breath plumed white, but inside her chest something burned steady and real. Back in the barn, the children's laughter rang out, small, bright, whole. The day passed plain and quiet. Sophronia split wood till her shoulders screamed, then boiled water for wash. Zerelda sorted a rusty bucket of nails by size, turning play into purpose when Elwood declared they'd build something lasting. Judson practiced knots with a length of rope Thaddeus had cut, brow creased in that same focused way she'd come to know so well. She moved through the space easy now, like it fit her bones. Not because she'd claimed it outright, but because she'd earned her place, one hard task at a time, rooted. She'd quit waiting around for orders or permission long ago. That night, with Thaddeus gone, the barn felt hollowed out, colder, emptier, like the walls themselves missed his quiet weight in the corners. The wind came snarling back low and mean, but the stove held its fire steady, stubborn against the chill. Sophronia stayed up late, feeding the flames. Phineas nestled warm against her heart. Her mind churned restless as the sparks, turning over what he'd laid before her. Not some grand rescue, not sweet talk or stolen kisses, just a place, a real life. Offered plain, like a slice of bread passed across a table. No strings, no tally kept. She hadn't answered out loud. Not yet. By the time gray light crept under the door, her decision sat solid inside her. Thaddeus rode back late the following afternoon. Jericho loaded heavy with flour sacks, beans, and a small poke of dried apples. He found her outside stringing wet clothes on a line she'd rigged between 2 posts. She turned at the crunch of his boots in the snow. His face stayed guarded as ever, but his shoulders eased down a notch, like he'd been carrying a stone, and finally set it aside. You made it, she said. Always do, he answered, voice even. He passed her the sack of apples. She took it without pause. You didn't need to bring these. I know. They stood there a moment, wind snapping the damp laundry overhead, weak sun hanging high but trying. At last Sophronia spoke. I'm staying? He looked straight into her eyes. Reckoned you might. A small, true smile broke across her face. That evening she cooked over the stove, while the children chased each other near the door in soft play. Thaddeus perched on a 3-legged stool, tinkering with a battered lantern. When his gaze drifted her way, something in his weathered features had eased. Not joy exactly, but a deeper calm. Lines still etched deep by years, yet softened by something steadier. Trust, maybe. the slow reclaiming of something long buried. After supper, Judson climbed uninvited into Thaddeus's lap. The man didn't push him off, just kept rubbing oil into the lantern's metal, letting the boy settle against his chest. Sophronia watched from across the room. No words needed. Later, with the young ones asleep and the fire down to red coals, she settled beside Thaddeus on the straw. Their shoulders brushed, just barely. Enough. He turned to her. She met his look. Neither glanced away this time. "I don't expect a thing," he said quiet. "I know," she answered. "But I hope." She laid her hand over his rough palm, callous to callous, and nodded once. Snow started again that night, falling gentle now, like grace, or an unspoken vow. Spring crept in slow and hushed, soaking into the frozen ground like water through cracked leather. Snow slid off the hills in lazy rivulets, pooling around the barn before sinking deep. First green shoots speared up through the mud, pale, tender, determined. The sky remembered its blue, growing bolder each morning. Sophronia stood at the field's edge, skirts hiked and pinned, boots sunk in soft thaw. Thaddeus stood beside her, one hand resting on the handle of a rusted plow, the other shading his eyes as he scanned the land. It would demand sweat. More than 2 sets of hands could give easy. But it wasn't dead. Not hopeless. "This dirt's been lying fallow," he said, "like it's been waiting on somebody to come wake it." She gave a faint smile. "Or something?" He didn't reply, just crouched and worked the soil between thick fingers, gentle despite the strength in them. She watched the careful motion. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Every move carried weight, like it all mattered. They started with potatoes, then beans. Sophronia dug beside him day after day till her back screamed and her arms shook. The children pitched in when they could, carrying buckets, pulling weeds, or tended the fire and cleared stones from the rows when they couldn't. Sunburned, mud-streaked, bone-tired, but the smiles came freer now. Laughter without shadows. The barn had transformed, too. Thaddeus patched the collapsed corner with boards salvaged from an old rail fence. Sophronia draped quilts to carve out warmer sleeping nooks. A fresh shelf appeared by the stove, holding the worn book of Psalms she'd read from, spine cracked deeper now, and a tin box crammed with seeds she'd labeled on scraps of paper. Some evenings Thaddeus took down an old fiddle he'd kept wrapped in oilcloth up in the house attic, untouched since Zephyr drowned. The strings rasped rough. The notes weren't pretty, but they carried. Sophronia listened from the doorway, bare feet on cold boards, Phineas sleeping heavy in her arms. Something inside her unfurled slow, like a flower long starved of light. One night after the others had quieted, he held the fiddle out to her. "I don't know the first thing about it," she said. "Neither do I," he answered. She took it anyway. Drew the bow across the strings, slow, uncertain. The notes came out rough and uneven, scraping like a beginner's hand on a worn bow, but they belonged to them. Raw, honest, shared in the quiet. When the last note faded into the night, Thaddeus set the fiddle aside, fetched the stone jug, and poured 2 tin cups of warm cider. They carried them outside and settled on the low bench by the barn wall, backs against the weathered boards. The air hung cool and clean, alive with the chorus of frogs down by the creek and the faint whisper of new leaves stirring on the cottonwoods. He turned his head and studied her profile in the starlight. "You ever think about putting down roots deeper?" he asked. "Something more solid than this barn." "You mean build a house?" "I mean build a home." She glanced back at the slant-roofed shelter behind them, then met his eyes again. I reckon we've already started one. He gave a slow nod, letting the words settle. After a long beat, he spoke again. Been thinking about riding into town, speaking with the magistrate. For what? Papers, land deed, for us. Her breath hitched, not from shock, but from the steady weight of certainty in his low voice. You sure about this? Been sure since that first storm broke and you walked through the door, he said. Just wasn't certain you'd stay. She reached across the small space between them, wrapped both hands around his one rough palm, and held on. I'm not going anywhere, Thaddeus. Not ever. They stayed like that, hands clasped, cups forgotten, until the stars began to pale overhead. Dawn came soft and golden, no frost left to bite the ground. Inside the barn, Judson, Zerelda, Elwood, and Phineas slept deep and peaceful. Outside, two people sat shoulder to shoulder, watching the light spread across the thawing land, and felt in their bones that it was going to hold. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening, and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories, from our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances, although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development. The emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.